The lock clicked behind me, final as a coffin closing. I stood trembling at the threshold of my childhood home, for scars still purple on my arms. Inside, Mira sat at Father's oak desk, signing papers with a notary whose smile was all teeth and no warmth. "You weren't supposed to be back yet," my sister said, not even looking up. The hospital gown beneath my jacket suddenly felt thinner. Father's paintings lined every wall, but each one now wore a small gold tag with Myra's name printed in elegant script. My breath caught. The notary slid a document across the desk, Father's will, but something about it looked wrong. The signature wavered in places Father's hand never did. "Everything's been transferred," Mira continued, finally meeting my eyes. "The house, the gallery, the accounts. All legal." My knees nearly buckled. The notary sealed the folder with red wax, pressed his stamp down hard. Mira turned her back to me then, dismissing me like hired help. Outside, rain began to fall. I sat on the curb, rain soaking through everything I wore. My hands shook as I pulled out the faded photograph I'd kept by my hospital bed. Father and me, standing in front of his gallery, his paint-stained fingers on my shoulder. "My name is Alara," I whispered to no one. "And this was the day I lost everything I thought love protected." The gallery's bright blue paint looked gray now in the downpour. Seagulls cried overhead, their voices sharp and mocking. I pressed my palm against my chest, trying to remember Father's last words before the surgery that nearly killed me. "Don't let the sea harden your heart, little shell," he'd said, his voice already fading. But how could I keep my heart soft when everything around me had turned to stone? The street blurred through my tears. A car passed, splashing cold water across my legs. I didn't move. Couldn't move. The world felt impossibly heavy. When I finally stood to leave, something crinkled in my jacket pocket. I pulled out a small wooden box I didn't remember packing. Father's handwriting covered the lid in careful letters. Inside lay only a brass key and a folded note. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper. "When the tide turns, find the truth," it read in Father's familiar script. The key was warm against my palm, though it had been in my cold pocket for hours. I turned it over, searching for some clue about what it opened. Nothing. Just smooth brass worn soft by handling. But as I held it, something stirred in my chest. Not quite hope. Not yet. But something like a question forming in the dark. I slipped the key back into my pocket and started walking toward the pier. Behind me, lights blazed in the house that was no longer mine. I didn't look back. 3 days later, I set up my easel at the old pier where tourists gathered. The salt air stung my healing lungs, but I needed the money. My few possessions fit in a canvas bag. I'd been sleeping in a room above Thane's bookstall, paying what little I could. The pier smelled of rust and fish oil and engine grease. Children ran past, laughing and eating ice cream. I sketched their faces quickly, charging almost nothing. My hands were weaker than before the illness, but muscle memory guided the charcoal across paper. That's when I first noticed him. An elderly fisherman standing by the railing, watching me with eyes the color of deep water. He wore a faded blue sweater with patches at the elbows. Our eyes met for just a moment. Then he placed something on my easel's ledge and walked away before I could speak. A small shell, white as bone, with strange initials carved underneath. I turned the shell over in my palm that night, unable to sleep. The initials read E and R in careful script. My father's name was Rowan. My name, Ilara. But why would someone carve our initials into a shell and leave it for me? I traced the letters with my fingertip, feeling their depth. That night, I dreamed of Father's workshop. The smell of turpentine and linseed oil. The scratch of pencil on canvas. His voice humming an old sea shanty while he worked. When I woke, moonlight streamed through the small window. The shell sat on the nightstand, and in the pale light, it almost seemed to glow. I picked it up, pressed it to my ear like I'd done as a child. Instead of ocean sounds, I heard my father's voice, faint as memory. "The sea keeps secrets for those who wait." My heart hammered. I couldn't explain it, but I knew something had begun. A week later, Mira hosted a garden party at the estate. I heard about it from the baker, who mentioned it while wrapping my daily bread. I shouldn't have gone. I knew that. But something pulled me there anyway. I stood across the street, hidden behind the old oak tree we'd climbed as children. Photographers moved through the crowd, their cameras clicking. Mira stood on the terrace in a white dress, champagne in hand, unveiling what she called her art collection. My first painting hung behind her. The one father had helped me complete when I was 12. A lighthouse in storm. My signature, small and careful, was still visible in the corner. Mira raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she announced. The crowd applauded. Then her eyes found mine across the street. She smiled slowly. Her lips moved, forming words only I could read. "You should have stayed sick." I turned away before my tears could fall. Thane found me crying behind his bookstall that evening. He was a middle-aged man with silver in his dark hair and laugh lines around his eyes. "Kindness won't feed you," he said, not unkindly, handing me a handkerchief. I wiped my face, embarrassed. "No," I agreed. "But it keeps me human." He snorted but smiled. "You're stubborn, I'll give you that." Over the following days, he became my reluctant friend. He'd save me day-old pastries from the bakery next door. Bring me tea when the wind turned cold. All while insisting he was just being practical. "Can't have you dying on my doorstep," he'd say. "Bad for business." But I saw the concern in his eyes when my cough worsened. The way he'd casually drape his coat over my shoulders when I shivered. Thane believed in facts and money and things you could hold. He thought I was foolish for staying kind. But he kept helping anyway. The morning tide brought something impossible. I arrived at my usual spot on the pier to find a canvas washed up on the sand. Soaked and warped, but unmistakably father's work. Two girls stood on a pier in the painting, one holding a lantern. The brushstrokes were his. That particular way he layered blue for water. My name was etched faintly in the corner. Ilara. Not Mira. When I carefully turned the canvas over, my breath stopped. The same initials as the shell. E and R. But this painting had been in father's private studio. Mira would have taken it with everything else. How did it end up in the ocean? I looked around, but the beach was empty except for gulls. My hands shook as I carried the painting back to my room. That night, I dreamed of father again. "Some things can't be stolen," he said in the dream. "Only found." The old fisherman appeared at my easel the next morning. Up close, I could see the weathered map of his face, the white of his hair, the steadiness in his gaze. "Name's Rowan," he said, his voice rough as sand. "Like my father," I whispered. He nodded once. "Your father spoke of you often." From his weathered bag, he pulled out my old easel. The one I thought Mira had thrown away. He'd repaired the broken leg, reinforced the joints. "He asked me to keep this safe," Rowan said. "Until you were ready." My throat tightened. Ready for what? But Rowan was already walking away, his footsteps silent on the wooden planks. "Wait," I called. He paused without turning. "Your father was my closest friend," he said. "He spoke of you every day. But never of her." The words settled into my bones. Then he was gone, disappearing into the morning mist like he'd never been there at all. I examined the repaired easel that evening, running my fingers over Rowan's careful work. That's when I found it. A small brass slot hidden beneath the frame, covered by a sliding panel. My heart raced as I pulled father's key from my pocket. It fit perfectly. The soft click echoed in the quiet room. I tried to lift the back panel, but the wood was swollen, jammed tight. Just as I was about to give up, a folded note slipped out through a crack. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Patience, my girl," father's handwriting read. "The tide must rise twice." I read it again and again, trying to understand. The tide must rise twice. What did that mean? I looked at the easel, at the stuck panel, at the key still inserted in its lock. Something was hidden inside. Something father wanted me to find. But not yet. Not until the right time. I left the key in place and waited. The letter arrived on a grey morning 2 weeks later. Official town seal, heavy paper. Inside, a single page. Mira planned to auction the remaining estate items. Among them, father's sealed tool chest and the original easel stand from his studio. The auction would be held in 3 days. I read it twice, my vision blurring. The tool chest contained father's most personal items. Things he'd never let anyone touch. If Mira sold it to strangers, those pieces of him would be scattered forever. I rushed to the pier, clutching the letter. Thane was arranging books on his stall. "I need to go to this auction," I said breathlessly. He read the notice, his expression darkening. "Elara, you can't afford to bid on anything there." "I know," I said. "But I have to be there anyway." Thane sighed heavily. "The law's on her side." I folded the letter carefully. "The truth isn't." The auction house buzzed with wealthy collectors and curious locals. I stood in the back, hood pulled up, trying to stay invisible. Mira arrived in black silk, her lawyer at her side. She scanned the crowd, eyes skipping right over me. The auctioneer began with smaller items. Paintings, furniture, books. I watched them go to strangers, each one a piece of father disappearing. Then came the main attraction. Lot 47, the auctioneer announced. A sealed tool chest, 18th century, belonging to the late Rowan Ashfield. But as the assistants went to retrieve it, confusion rippled through the room. Whispered conversations. The auctioneer's smile faltered. "It appears," he said carefully, "that lot 47 is missing. Stolen from the warehouse last night." Mira shot to her feet. "That's impossible. I want security footage." But I was already slipping out the back door, my heart pounding. That evening, I found the chest beside my easel, dripping seawater. A note on top read simply, "You kept your promise." My hands shook as I opened the chest. Inside, I found father's paintbrushes, each one worn to his hand's shape. His journals, filled with sketches and notes and memories. And beneath them all, a sealed envelope marked with his wax seal. I broke it carefully. Inside was a partial map of the pier, hand-drawn in father's precise lines. An X marked a spot beneath the old gallery building. My old gallery, where Mira now lived. I studied the map by candlelight, tracing the route with my finger. Father had hidden something there. Something Mira hadn't found despite taking everything else. The map showed a trapdoor beneath the floorboards in the corner studio. Father's private space that he'd never let anyone enter. Not even me. "What are you trying to tell me?" I whispered to the empty room. The candle flickered. Outside, I heard the ocean's endless rhythm. The tide must rise twice. The storm hit on a moonless night. Wind howled through the streets, rain lashing sideways. I wrapped father's map in oilcloth and tucked it inside my jacket. Thane had tried to stop me. "You'll die out there," he'd said. But something told me this was the moment. The tide was rising. I made my way to the old gallery, now dark and abandoned on the bottom floor, while Mira lived in the renovated apartment above. I'd kept a key to the side entrance from before my hospital stay. It still worked. Inside, the space echoed with memory. Father's paint smell lingered faintly beneath mildew and dust. I made my way to the corner studio, found the loose floorboard father's map indicated. Beneath it, a rusted hatch. My brass key fit the lock. I turned it, muscles straining. The hatch opened with a groan. Below, I saw darkness and the gleam of water. Thunder cracked overhead. The gallery's old windows burst inward, salt water flooding across the floor. I barely made it out. Rowan found me the next morning, collapsed on the beach. He helped me back to the bookstall, wrapped me in blankets while Thane made tea with shaking hands. "The sea tests what it loves," Rowan said quietly, spreading out father's soaked map to dry. I was too weak to speak. My lungs burned. For a moment, I feared the illness had returned. But slowly, warmth seeped back into my limbs. Rowan waited until I could sit up before speaking again. "Your father and I," he said, "we knew Myra's heart. Knew what she'd do when he was gone. So we made a plan." I stared at him. "What plan?" "A second will," Rowan said simply. "Hidden where only you could find it. Your father left 2 inheritances. One for each daughter. Mira got the inheritance of greed. You get the inheritance of truth." My hands tightened around the mug. "Where is it?" Rowan smiled faintly. "You already have everything you need." Then he was gone again, leaving only wet footprints. I didn't see Rowan for days after that. His boat sat empty at the dock, rocking with the waves. Local fishermen said he'd gone out before the storm and never returned. They shook their heads sadly. "The sea takes what it wants," they said. But I couldn't accept that. I went to his boat, found it cleaned and ready, as if he'd planned not to return. On the captain's seat, another shell. When I picked it up, it cracked in my palm, revealing a tiny scroll of paper inside. My hands shook as I unrolled it. If you're reading this, the tide has turned. Look beneath where you fell. I read it 3 times. Where I fell. The gallery. The flooded room. The hatch. I had to go back. But this time, I needed to wait for low tide. Needed to go down into whatever Father and Rowan had hidden beneath the gallery floor. The answer was below. It had always been below. 2 days later, at the lowest tide of the month, I returned to the gallery. This time, I brought rope and a lantern. The flooded room had drained, leaving only puddles and the smell of salt. I opened the hatch again and descended the rusty ladder. Below was a cellar I'd never known existed. Stone walls, dry and carefully sealed. And covering every surface, Father's paintings. Portraits of me as a child. Me learning to paint. Me laughing, sleeping, reading. Each one titled with dates and small notes. The True Heir, read one caption. My Gift to the World, read another. Tears blurred my vision. In the corner, mounted on the wall, was a sealed scroll tube. My hands shook as I lifted it down. The wax seal bore Father's mark. Inside, I found papers. Legal documents. A letter in Father's handwriting. And across the top of the first page, bold and clear, the last will and testament of Rowan Ashfield. Second and final. I brought the scroll to Myra's estate the next morning. My heart hammered as I knocked on the door I'd once opened without thinking. Myra answered, her face twisting when she saw me. What do you want? To give you this, I said quietly, handing her the sealed scroll. She snatched it, suspicious. What is it? Father's second will, I said simply. The real one. Her laugh was sharp and cruel. You forged this. Desperate little Alara, trying to steal back what's mine. But when she broke the seal, something fell out. The notary's original stamp. The same one that had sealed the will she'd shown me. The same one that had transferred everything to her name. Myra's face went white. Her hands trembled as she unrolled the document and began to read. I watched her eyes move across the words. Watched understanding dawn. Watched her perfect mask crack. I said nothing. Simply turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard the scroll hit the floor. For the first time, my sister's confidence had shattered. The lawyer Thane recommended was a stern woman named Bellamy Cross. She read Father's second will 3 times, checking every signature and seal. Finally, she looked up at me. This is authentic, she said. Notarized by the same official who handled the first will. But this one is dated 3 days before your father's death. Which makes it the valid document. She explained what Father had done. The first will, the one Mira used, had been a test. It contained the house, the savings, the obvious wealth. Things that could be lost. But the second will held the true inheritance. The gallery's land rights, which were worth millions. Art shares Father had quietly accumulated over decades. A charitable trust fund in my name. And a letter explaining that he'd known Myra's heart. Known she'd take everything if given the chance. He was protecting you, Bellamy said gently. And testing her. I thought of Father's last words. Don't let the sea harden your heart. He'd known all along. The court moved quickly once they understood the situation. Myra's accounts were frozen. The house was seized pending investigation. Everything she'd taken was now in legal limbo. I watched it unfold from the pier, painting tourists' portraits while my sister's world collapsed. Reporters swarmed the estate. Former friends stopped calling. The society that had praised her now whispered behind raised hands. Mira called me once. I almost didn't answer. How could you? She said, her voice breaking. How could I? I repeated quietly. You took everything while I was dying in a hospital. You forged Father's signature. You sold his memory for gold tags and garden parties. She was silent for a long moment. I thought you'd never wake up, she whispered finally. The doctors said you might not make it. So you decided to take what wasn't yours, I finished. Just in case. She hung up without another word. I looked at the phone for a long time afterward. Then I went back to painting. The sunset was beautiful that evening. A package arrived at the bookstall 3 weeks later. Thane brought it to me, eyebrows raised. Inside was a letter in handwriting I knew. Rowan's. If you're reading this, it began, I've gone where your father waits. We planned everything together, he and I. Every shell, every painting, every test. He needed to know you'd keep your heart soft, even when the world turned hard. You passed, little shell. You always would have. I read through tears. At the bottom was a photograph. Father and Rowan younger, standing in front of the gallery. Behind them, carved into the wooden beam above the door, words I'd never noticed. For Alara. I pressed the photo to my chest and cried. Not from sadness anymore. From gratitude. From understanding. Father and Rowan had protected me in the only way they could. By teaching me that goodness was worth more than gold. 6 months after the trial ended, I stood in front of the restored gallery. The Tide's gift, read the new sign in Father's favorite blue. Inside, children painted at easels I'd bought with the trust fund. The smell of linseed oil and turpentine filled the air again. Local artists donated supplies. Families came for weekend classes. Even Thane had helped, organizing an art fair that brought visitors from 3 towns over. You turned loss into light, he said, watching a girl carefully mix colors on her palette. I'm just doing what Father taught me, I replied. The gallery felt alive again. Not the same as before. Better. Built on truth instead of theft. Built on kindness instead of greed. That evening, after everyone left, I walked through the empty space. Father's paintings hung on the walls, no longer bearing Myra's name. Just his signature. And mine beside them. Thank you, I whispered to the quiet room. The floorboards creaked. Almost like an answer. Before the grand reopening, I found one last canvas in the cellar. Blank, stretched, waiting. A note was pinned to the frame in Father's writing. For when you understand. I understood now. I set up the canvas and began to paint. The image came without planning. A pier at sunset. 2 figures standing together. Father and Rowan, watching the sea. As I worked, something strange happened. Faint lines appeared beneath my brushstrokes. Words, written on the canvas in pencil before it had been stretched. I carefully revealed them. The sea keeps secrets for those who wait. Father's handwriting. He'd written it and then stretched the canvas over it, hiding the words until someone painted there. Until I painted there. I wept as I worked, tears mixing with the paint. Every loss had led here. Every betrayal had taught me something. Every moment of pain had been a tide, rising and falling, wearing away what was false until only truth remained. The grand reopening drew the whole town. Bellamy Cross stood near the door, keeping watch in case Mira appeared. She didn't. But in the crowd, I saw familiar faces. The baker who'd always given me extra bread. The families whose children I'd painted. Thane, of course, beaming with pride he tried to hide. And at the back briefly, I thought I saw Rowan. But when I blinked, he was gone. I stepped up to give a small speech. My hands shook as I held Father's second will. My father wrote something at the end of this document, I said. I'd like to share it now. To the daughter who proved that love, not blood, defines family. To Alara, who kept her heart soft when the world turned sharp. This is your inheritance. Not the money or the property, but the understanding that goodness never dies. It waits. The crowd applauded. I saw tears in several eyes. When I looked up, Mira stood at the very edge of the gathering. Our eyes met. She didn't smile. Didn't wave. Just nodded once. Then turned and walked away. 3 months later, I stood on the pier at dawn. The tide was going out, pulling shells and stones and secrets back to the deep. I held a white shell I'd painted myself, marked with the initials E and R. Father and Rowan. The men who'd loved me enough to test me. To teach me that the greatest inheritance isn't counted in money. It's measured in moments. In choices. In the decision to stay kind when cruelty would be easier. I placed the shell at the tide line and stepped back. The water reached for it, gentle fingers pulling it away. The shell tumbled once, twice, then disappeared beneath the surface. The sea keeps its promises, I whispered. Back at the gallery, children were already gathering for morning class. Thane was setting up tea. The smell of paint and possibility filled the air. I'd lost everything once. And in losing it, found what actually mattered. The tide had risen twice, just as Father promised. And I was finally home.